Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajanarandana Yashodanandana Brajajanarandana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajanarandana Yamuna Tiravanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jai Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Jai Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya Shtutarashata Shri Srimad Dandi Goswami Bhai Charnaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya Ashtatarashata Shri Srimad Dandi Goswami Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaja Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Gaura Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Krishna. Hare Krishna. Before beginning today's verse, I'd like to ask for blessings of all the assembled devotees to be able to say something pleasing to their hearts and meaningful and in compliance with the instructions of Srila Prabhupada and Guru Parampara. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim sarasvatim vyasam tato jayamajirayet nashta prayesha bhadrashu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavatsyuttama shloke bhakti bhavati naishtike. Reading from the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 25, the characteristics of King Puranjana, text 50. Even though, well, the next verse, actually these two verses, 50 and 51, they're supposed to be discussed together. Because 50th is speaking about one ear and the right ear, and the 51st verse speaks about the left ear. And they have different functions, but it would be probably best to discuss them together, even though, especially because today's purport is really short and tomorrow's purport is very substantial. Srila Prabhupada speaks at length about the importance of hearing. But anyhow, today's allocated verse is 50. I don't want to encroach upon, but someone is already preparing for tomorrow's class, so they want to encroach upon they want to steal their thunder. Is it? But then on Tuesday, what should they do? Should they do two? Or two, both. Okay. So with the permission of Swarupa Damodar Prabhu, we'll do two verses. Let's see. Actually, I think I just stick to one. There's a calculation in my mind. Today's verse is 50. No, I think we go back to number 50. Can we? Pitrihur nripapurya dvar. Pitrihur nripapurya dvar. Dakshinena puranjanaha. Dakshinena puranjanaha. Rashtram dakshina panchalam. Rashtram dakshina panchalam. Yati shrutadharanvitaha. Yati shrutadharanvitaha. Pitrihunripapurya Dakshinena puranjanaha. Rashtram Dakshina Panchalam Yati Shrutadharan Vitaha. Nina Puranjanaha. Bodhiyadvar Dakshinena Puranjanaha Chandramitaha. Vaishnavis? Word for word. Pitrihu, of the name Pitrihu. Nripa, O king. Puryaha, of the city. Dvaraha, gate. Dakshinena, on the southern side. Puranjanaha, King Puranjana. Rastram, country. Dakshina, southern. Panchalam, of the name Panchala. Yati, used to go. Shrutidhara Anvitaha, along with his friend Shrutidhara. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The southern gate of the city was known as Pitrihu, and through that gate, King Puranjana used to visit the city named Dakshina Panchala, accompanied by his friend Shrutidhara. Purport: the right ear is used for karma kandya, or fruitive activities. As long as one is attached to the enjoyment of material resources, he hears from the right ear and uses the five senses to elevate himself to the higher planetary systems like Pitriloka. Consequently, the right ear is here described as the Pitrihu gate. It's a very short purport. Pitrihu Nripa Purya Dvar Dakshinena Puranjanaha Rastram Dakshina Panchalam Yati Shrutadharan Vitaha. The southern gate of the cities was known as Pitrihu, and through that gate King Puranjana used to visit the city named Dakshina Panchala, accompanied by his friend Shrutidhara. Om Jnanati Mirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutpada Kamalan Shri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahavana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarine Mukham Karoti Vachalam Pangum Gayate Girim Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Gurun Dinataranam. Yesterday and the day before we heard from His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj. Yesterday he spoke about the sense of taste and speech, as he explained. That's why the previous gate described in verse 49 is called mukha. Mukhya means the primary one, because it combines two vital functions, communication and sustaining one's life. And the day before, Swarupa Damodar Prabhu described the sense of smell, olfactory function. And it's interesting how today we're discussing the sense of hearing, which is counterbalanced or juxtapositioned with the sense of smell by way of, like the sense of smell is the basic, the most foundational, you could say, sense for material existence. In the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is described that the lower the consciousness of a living entity is, the more that living entity relies on the sense of smell. And the example given by Srila Prabhupada is that of dogs, who determine the value of things by smelling it, not by hearing about it, not by looking at it, but by smelling. And it's also quite interesting that the sense of smell can override all other perceptions. If something looks beautiful but has a foul smell, then we don't feel attracted to that object or person. Even something tastes like, Sarupa Damodar Prabhu gave the example of durian, that fruit. And he asked if anyone in the audience tasted it. I did. And it really takes an effort. What it does actually, and it's connected to the next thing that we're going to discuss, is that not by looking at it, because it looks also quite terrifying. It looks like a melon with spikes on it. And it's very dangerous to handle, because if you're not careful, you can easily cut yourself. The durian is quite large and difficult to open it without injuring yourself. But then it's by hearing other people who say, probably those people who had a cold and they couldn't feel the smell and they tasted it, but they say it tastes heavenly. And it does. I don't want to make any promotion for durians, take it at your own risk, especially if you have food allergies. But the sense of the smell tells you, don't try it, it's so bad. And it does smell has a very objectionable smell. But then when you taste it, it tastes like a combination of mangoes, bananas, cream, and nuts and honey and everything combined, rolled into one. A very nice texture. But it's interesting that the sense of smell can override all other perceptions, be it sound or visuals or the other taste, other perceptions. So when the people of Kali Yuga become completely degraded to the level of consciousness characteristic of animals, the Lord Kalki, when he comes to preach to them in their own way, in his own way, by mostly exterminating them, but then the remaining citizens or residents of the age of Kali become purified by the smell of Lord Kalki. He exhibits or emanates a very attractive transcendental fragrance that purifies the mind of those residents of Kali remaining on the surface of the planet, and become pure devotees just by smelling. And Swarupa Damodar Prabhu concluded his class the day before yesterday with a very inspiring, very fragrant passage from Chaitanya Charitamrita. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu smells the bodily aroma of Lord Krishna. That aroma is actually described if someone wants to create one's own very successful perfume, like he quoted Chanel No. 5. And there is a formula in Chaitanya Charitamrita given of that substance which covers Lord Krishna's body and gives it fragrance. Actually, it's an inseparable part of Krishna's persona. It's not that Krishna, unlike us, has to use perfume to cover the natural bodily odor like people do. Actually, it's his internal smell, and it's made of 4 different ingredients: musk, aguru, camphor, and sandalwood. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says in that passage that even the bodies of pure devotees like Sanatana Goswami, for Krishna, they exhibit the same kind of attractive smell. That's one thing. That's on the, you could say, the most basic end of the spectrum. But on the other hand, and we are hearing about it today, and we're beginning to hear it, because the next verse will speak at more length and detail about spiritual sound vibration. The spiritual life depends on the sense of hearing. Just like olfactory function can override all other perceptions, in the same way, when we hear a pure devotee speaking about the spiritual reality, spiritual realm, then that perception, that information, not just information, but experience that we get from the pure devotee can override all other attachments or perceptions, misconceptions of this material world. And that hearing from the pure devotee, from whichever ear, because now Prabhupada speaks about this right ear on the right side, on the southern gate of the city, called Pitrihu. Prabhupada explains it is meant for hearing about fruitive activities, as opposed to the other ear, the left ear, even though in our initiation ceremonies we usually turn to the spiritual master with our right ear to receive guided Diksha mantras from him. And there is a little bit of controversy about that, but it's explained. There is an explanation for it. I'm not going to dwell on it. But the point is that by hearing from the spiritual master, from whatever ear, we receive a more convincing, more compelling, and more real picture of the world of reality than what the other senses tell us: the touch, the smell, the visual perception, and the olfactory function. So much so that whatever the pure devotee tells us becomes the reality on which or around which we base and build everything else in our lives. It is described in Rig Veda, Om tad Vishnoh paramam padam sada pashyanti suraya diviva chaksharatam tad vipraso vipanivo Vishnuriyat paramam padam susamindate. It says there that the pure devotees who come from the spiritual world, just like Srila Prabhupada and the previous acharyas, they come from the spiritual world, and then they, by their narrations about the spiritual world, and actually, but whatever they say, and I'll just read the verse or a little or short excerpt from Prabhupada's purport explaining that point. Whatever they say wakes us up to the spiritual reality. It's compared, Prabhupada says, to a person who is bitten by a snake. And when one is bitten by a snake, there are many venomous snakes in Africa or in Australia, places that I visit. And their bite, when delivered before killing a person, oftentimes it makes the person unconscious, puts him or her in a state of a coma. But then Prabhupada explains there is an art of bringing such a person back from almost being dead, almost death, by chanting special mantras that wake a person up and counteract the effect of poison. And this is how a disciple approaches the spiritual master. There's a mantra in Hari Bhakti Vilasa which the disciple is supposed to recite when he or she approaches the spiritual master for initiation. It says, how does it go? Gurur samsara vahyan dagdam mam kaladashtam chatvam aham sharanam gata. Trayasvo, yes, that's how it starts. Trayasva bho jaganatha gurur samsara vahyana dagdam mam kaladashtam cha tvam aham sharanam gata. my dear spiritual master, you are the master of the universe for me. In other words, as Prabhupada explains in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, by the mercy of the spiritual master, primarily, and his mercy is manifested through what he speaks, through the sound vibration. And Prabhupada explains that by hearing the spiritual master rendering service unto him, the Lord agrees to reveal oneself to us in proportion to the service rendered. In other words, the material body recedes and is replaced by, as Prabhupada explains, with spiritual reality which is manifested to us through the instructions and the voice and the narrations emanating from the mouth of the spiritual master. So that's why the spiritual master has that power to cancel material existence. Not in a sense that the world as we know it with its physical laws will stop working or acting upon us. Not like that, but will become immune to its influence on the consciousness. What's explained in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, or is it 12th canto, I think, that there are different stages of annihilation of the material universe, and the fourth stage, called Atyantiki, final, complete and irrevocable annihilation of the material existence for us, happens when the material existence ceases to be, ceases to exist within us, not outside of us. When we develop pure Krishna consciousness, then and only then the material world will stop existing for us. And this is affected by instructions from the spiritual master. So Prabhupada explains, the spiritual master, by giving us instructions of speaking about Krishna, wakes us up to the state of real consciousness. I am burned by the samsara, by the fire of samsara, and I'm particularly, it's mentioned here, bitten by the black snake of time. The black snake of time has bit me, and because of that I am in a state of coma, in a state of unconsciousness, means deprived of Krishna consciousness. And you, my dear spiritual master, can reverse the poisonous effect of the snake bite by bringing me back to my real consciousness. And this is what Prabhupada says, very interestingly. He says in the 25th verse of the 20th chapter of this canto, 4:20-25, it's one of those seminal purports by Srila Prabhupada which are encyclopedic in their scope and extremely foundational for our spiritual life. He says, as soon as a sleeping living entity hears the powerful voice emanating from the mouth of a pure devotee, he immediately remembers his eternal relationship with the Lord, although up until that moment he had forgotten everything. For a conditioned soul, therefore, it's very important to hear from the mouth of a pure devotee who is fully surrendered to the lotus feet of the Lord, without any material desire, speculative knowledge, and contamination of the modes of material nature. He says, the spiritual master, although when a pure devotee speaks, the articulation of his voice may resemble the sound of the material sky, the voice is spiritually very powerful because it touches the particles of saffron dust on the lotus feet of the Lord. And that's why, that Rig Veda verse that we quoted, Om Tad Vishnoh Paramam Padam Sada Pashyanti Surayaha, these great devotees coming from the spiritual world, they carry with them that not just an image, but the full presence, the complete presence of the spiritual world encapsulated, contained in the sound vibration of their voice. And the verse explains that these great devotees, they are called Suris. Suris means transcendental poets. A poet is a very special profession, I could say, or special ability. A poet is someone who, not just that he or she can rhyme things and write them in a very kind of nice literary arrangement. This is not poetry. Poetry, as is explained by Srila Jiva Goswami, Kavya, is the ability to communicate things that cannot be communicated by words. When he speaks or she speaks, then we get the impression, the emotions, the feelings, eventually the state of consciousness in which the person himself lives. And that's what poetry is. As Gopi Paranandana Prabhu used to explain, he really loved this topic. He said, kavya or poetry, transcendental poetry is, he said, because he loved ice cream, Gopi Paranandana Prabhu. Speaking about yesterday's verse and the class given by His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj, he spoke about tasting things. And Gopi Paranandana Prabhu said that the transcendental poet is someone who can speak about the taste of ice cream, butterscotch, that was his favorite flavor, in such a way that you can feel that butterscotch ice cream melting on your tongue. And you develop a desire to do what? To go and get it and taste it for yourself, right? So this is transcendental poet. Srila Prabhupada himself was also a poet, and he was glorified as such by his own spiritual master when Srila Prabhupada managed to encapsulate in one very short verse the entire mission of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. This is a poetry. This is poetry. Poetry is the ability to communicate in very few words the fathomless, endless depth of spiritual world. And he said, absolutely sentient, thou hast proved. Impersonal calamity, thou hast moved, right? That's the stanza that especially evoked the pleasure of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And he told his disciples what? He told them, whatever Abhay Charanaravinda Prabhu writes, publish. That was his immediate response to that ability to capture. Just like Rupa Goswami, again, he did the same thing with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam. He is glorified in this verse by saying that Rupa Goswami managed to enter the heart of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He managed to steal from Lord Chaitanya's heart the most precious, innermost emotion, the most confidential feelings of Lord Chaitanya, of his feelings of separation from Krishna. Sthapitam, and he proclaimed it to the whole world, but not by way of revealing private information, but by way of converting those feelings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu into principles of pure devotional service. So anyone can follow in the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Lord Chaitanya, when he saw what Rupa Goswami wrote by translating or deciphering Lord Chaitanya's enigmatic chant in front of Rathayatra, Lord Chaitanya said, you're the same boy, I'm the same girl, but the place is not good. Let's go to the bank of the river Vitasi. No, Vitasi is a tree. Reva, right, Reva, under the Vitasi tree. And let's continue our relationship there. Nobody knew what to make of it. Everyone, of course, believed that Lord Chaitanya was deeply absorbed in spiritual emotions, but nobody could decipher what he was speaking. It sounded like a mundane song to everyone else. But Rupa Goswami entered the mind of Lord Chaitanya, and he explained it in his own beautiful poetry, explaining the feelings of Krishna and Radharani. And when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu read the translation of his words by Rupa Goswami, written on a very nice, very beautiful handwriting of Srila Rupa Goswami. Who of you saw the handwriting of Srila Rupa Goswami? I saw. Lord Chaitanya said, its handwriting of Rupa Goswami was like pearls strung on a thread. Very nicely formed, beautiful handwriting. When you see it, you feel purified just by seeing it. It's called the art of calligraphy. Pure, transcendental calligraphy. Srila Prabhupada also had a very beautiful handwriting, and when one, not calligraphist, what they call them, graphologists, I think they call them, people who by your handwriting can tell you a lot about your character, or tell other people about your character. So when he saw the signature of Srila Prabhupada, he said, I don't know who this person is, but he can build the house in which the whole world can live. That was his reading of Prabhupada's handwriting. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu picked up that palm leaf with Rupa Goswami's handwriting, deciphering his enigmatic song. And what he felt robbed. He felt as if he kind of sneaked in and stole from his heart something that he was very carefully guarding in his own heart. And Rupa Goswami showed up, and Lord Chaitanya, he didn't have words to say. He just slapped him on the back. And he asked Sarupa Damodar, not Rupa Goswami, he asked Sarupa Damodar, Sarupa Damodar, how could Rupa Goswami explain what I actually hadn't revealed to anyone? How could he do that? And Sarupa Damodar said, well, whoever you empower, he can do that. It's your mercy, it's manifesting through him. So in the same way, Srila Prabhupada, when he came from this Diviva Chaksharatam Tadvi Prasad Vipanya, with these transcendental poets, the Suris, they can come to this world and they can find words, the same words. We have how many words we have in English vocabulary? People usually use about 1,000, 2,000 words in their day-to-day communication, but the complete dictionary has about, maybe 400,000 words, 500,000 words, including some completely arcane words which no one could understand. You need a dictionary to understand what that word means. When Bhakti Vikasha Maharaj wrote his book on Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, because Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur learned the English language just by reading the dictionary. As a young lad, was about 17 or 18 years of age, he decided to learn the English language, so he locked himself up with the full unabridged English dictionary, and he memorized it. And that's why he used these kind of words which cannot be understood even by his contemporaries who were native English speakers, very educated native English speakers. There are some lectures or conversations of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur with professors from England, and they were completely bewildered. They were completely defeated by just by the language alone that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur used. Ravindra Sarup Prabhu, a famous scholar of ISKCON, very educated, very learned person, PhD in philosophy, theology. When he writes something, sometimes I have to use a dictionary to look up words that he uses. He says once he decided he needed to read one article by Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he got stuck. He couldn't get past one sentence of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta. The words were understandable, but what he meant by those words combinedly, he couldn't understand. And he kept on, he explained in one of his classes, for 15 minutes, he was trying to understand what Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur meant by that phrase. He was connecting the words, building the grammatical structure, looking up their meanings, and then after 15 minutes of very hard labor, mental, intellectual labor, he understood what Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur meant. And then at that point of time, he also immediately understood that he already knew that, because Prabhupada had explained that in simple language, the same principle. So this is the ability of Suris. They come from the spiritual world, the spiritual reality which cannot be explained by words. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, sometimes I'm short of words. In English and Bengali and Sanskrit, any language, I don't have enough words to explain to you what I want to bring. No words that can explain. He was sometimes short of words, desperate to express what he wanted to express. But then the power of poetry is that it can somehow or other, through simple words, but adding an extra dimension to them, which is the spiritual component, which is what we actually get when we read Prabhupada's books. Prabhupada's books are written in very nice, educated English, but it's not that kind of arcane English no one can understand. The words are quite simple, especially in Chaitanya Charitamrita. But what we get from reading those words cannot be explained by words. It's just like when we eat a chapati, when it's offered, which is offered to Krishna, you get by eating the chapati not just the flour, the water and the salt that are the ingredients of the chapati. What do we get when we eat prasadam offered to Krishna? Not the carbohydrates and the proteins and the fat. What we get is Krishna Prem, which cannot be expressed or cannot be contained, cannot be broken down to flour, water and salt. But it's the added quality, by the mood of a devotee. In the same way, when we read Prabhupada's purports, or hear his lectures, or hear his kirtans, or associate with his devotees, we get that extra component which is contained in his words. And it's explained what the component is. In that verse which purport to that verse I quoted, Prithu Maharaj says, "My Lord, my dear Lord, you are glorified by the selected verses uttered by great personalities. Such glorification of your lotus feet is just like saffron particles. When a transcendental vibration from the mouths of great devotees carries the aroma of saffron dust of your lotus feet, the forgetful living entity gradually remembers his eternal relationship with you. Devotees thus gradually come to the right conclusion about the value of life. My dear Lord, I therefore do not need any other benediction but the opportunity to hear from the mouths of your pure devotees." And Prabhupada concludes his purport by saying, "Therefore the process of hearing from the mouths of a pure devotee is very important for making progress in the line of spiritual understanding." So that's what it is. It's their connection with Krishna. Krishna agrees to dance on their tongues. And by dancing on their tongues, he kind of shakes off of his feet the saffron particles that emanate, they go through the sound vibration, enter our ears, go through the heart, then germinate there and sprout into Bhakti Lata Bija. That's what it is. It's not what the pure devotee says. Because again, Prabhupada commented on so many different issues. Sometimes some of his lectures or conversations especially are even difficult to hear. Because sometimes they sound very harsh, like painful. Sometimes they speak about apparently mundane topics, apparently. But whatever a pure devotee touches with his mouth, with his tongue, becomes purified. As Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, or writes in his poem, Parakrita Ratsa Shata Dushani, he says, I don't remember the Bengali, but he says, a pure devotee never speaks anything except Rasa Katha. Never. Means whatever he says is Rasa Katha, by definition. Even if it's apparently just like chapatis, flour, water and salt, and pure devotee's speech apparently is this topic or that topic. It's not when he speaks about Rasa Lila, he speaks Krishna Katha. He speaks Krishna Katha always because it's inseparable. Krishna is inseparable from a pure devotee, from his heart and from his tongue. That's why it's so important for us to hear, and also when we speak, it's very important to be loyal or chaste, as it is explained in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. The words have to be chaste. It's very good. It's called satvachaha. Sat means chaste. We have to be chaste. Just like when you have currency, what's the currency name? Rands in South Africa, or rubles in Russia. When you look at the currency through the currency light, then there are some watermarks, which means that the currency is not fake, is not counterfeit. In the same way, whatever we speak, look at through the words that we pronounce, there should be some watermarks of Prabhupada's words, of the Shastric words, which back it up. They have to be supportable, have to be somehow rather an expression of what we have heard, and we just try to express it in our own words, but faithful to the original purport and the original intention. And coming back to the class given by Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj yesterday, he also spoke very nicely about the importance of prasadam, or importance of food in general. He says that without having food, we will become weak and die. That's an important point that he made yesterday. But continuing to today's verse, just like I tried to extend Sarupa Damodar Prabhu's class when he spoke about fragrance, how pure devotees, actually by hearing we can smell the fragrance of Krishna's lotus feet. So that sense of hearing, as we said, can override the need of any other perceptions. Actually, we cannot see Krishna, we cannot smell him, we cannot touch him, we cannot taste him, but we can hear him when a pure devotee speaks about it. And that sense of hearing transforms into taste, into touch, into seeing, into smelling. I have a Shastric reference for that. It says right here, in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Where is that? I had it here. Here. Marganti yate mukha padma nidaish chanda suparnai rishayo vivikte yasyagha mar shoda sharir varaya padam tirtha padah prapannaha. Please hear to this, very interesting. He says, it's Maitreya Muni speaking to Vidura. The lotus feet of the Lord are by themselves the shelter of all places of pilgrimage. The great clear-minded sages, carried by the wings of the Vedas, always search after the nest of your lotus. It's actually Lord Brahma speaking to the Lord. Your lotus-like face. Some of them surrender to your lotus feet at every step by taking shelter. Where is it? What is it, fragrance? Is it the wrong verse that sorry. Sorry, I got the wrong verse. But the verse I wanted to find and quote for you is that it says, just by hearing about the Lord from the mouths of great sages, we can feel the fragrance of His lotus feet. That's about fragrance. And also about seeing the Lord. There's another verse, and at this one I got right. Tvam bhakti yoga paribhavita hrit saroja ase shuteksheta patho nanu nartha pumsam yat diya ta orugaya vibhava yanti tad dat vapuh pranayase sadanugrahaya. O my Lord, your devotees can see you through the ears by the process of bona fide hearing, and thus their hearts become cleansed and you take your seat there. You are so merciful to your devotees that you manifest yourself in that particular eternal form of transcendence in which they always think of you. So this verse is also spoken by Lord Brahma. It says very interestingly that when we hear about Krishna from the mouths of pure devotees, then that hearing process creates a pathway. Like sometimes when a dignitary comes, the government officials roll out a red carpet so he could or she could see where to go. In the same way, when we hear about Krishna from the mouths of pure devotees like Srila Prabhupada and his bona fide representatives, that hearing process creates Shuta Ikshita Patha, the path of seeing the Lord by hearing about Him. Like that. And we can also taste Krishna. And that's a little bit more esoteric, but it's described in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. When Krishna and Balaram would go out to the forest of Vrindavan, the forest of Vrindavan would please all of their senses. The sense of touch, the sense of smell, the sense of vision, the sense of hearing and everything else. And taste, it is explained there. When Krishna and Balaram would open their mouths, then the air, the breeze would carry particles from the pure lakes of Vrindavan forest, that little kind of water dust mixed with some aromatic substances, and that would enter Krishna and Balaram's mouths as a transcendental mouth freshener of sorts. And it's explained by the acharyas that these lakes are compared to great sages who speak about Krishna. So even that, speaking about Krishna, by hearing from their mouths, we can get the sense of taste of Krishna's lotus feet. So Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj spoke about the importance of eating of prasadam, and here's what Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami says on that topic also, connecting yesterday's verse with today's verse. He says in Chaitanya Charitamrita, let me see if I have it here. Hare Krishna. Yes. That's Chaitanya Charitamrita, also 25th chapter of Madhya Lila. He says, Ye lilamrita vine kaya yadi ap annapane tabi bhaktara durbala jivan yara eka bindu pane utpulita tanumane hashe gaya karaye nartan. It's very nice poetic expression. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, again a poet. He is, Sarupa Damodar Prabhu remembered him as a great poet. Hear what he says. Men or women become strong and stout by eating sufficient grains. But the devotee who simply eats ordinary grains but does not taste the transcendental pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Krishna gradually becomes weak and falls down from the transcendental position. However, if one drinks but a drop of the nectar of Krishna's pastimes through the ears, his body and mind begin to bloom. That's interesting. It's a very good comparison. It literally says here, Utpula. What's that? Utpulita Tanumane. Tanumane, Tana means the body and Mana means the mind. Utpulita means just like flowers. You have a bush with flowers, like we have some bushes here with flowers, and sometimes they're not bloomed, they're contracted, the buds. You cannot use them for deity worship because they haven't bloomed yet. But after some time, with proper irrigation and proper conditions, then the flowers naturally bloom on their own and they exude fragrance. Like Svarupa Damodar Prabhu Mataji Sukumari the day before gave me a bag of extremely fragrant flowers for my deity worship. And it was right after Svarupa Damodar Prabhu's class on fragrance. I wrote to him, what an apt illustration for what fragrance really means. Extremely fragrant, right? So what Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami says here, however, if one drinks but a drop of the nectar of Krishna's pastimes, his body and mind begin to bloom, and he begins to laugh, sing and dance. In other words, the functions of the body and the mind change. Before, the body was feeling fatigued and tired and sick and unwilling to move, full of inertia, right? Laziness, the mode of ignorance. And Krishna says in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the mode of ignorance has to be counteracted with the mode of passion. We have to kick it into action without letting it sink into deeper ignorance. Just like in the morning when the alarm clock goes off, there's snooze function, of course, but then you can override that snooze function if you allow yourself to. It's best to just jump up first and then you can figure out what you want to do. And then the mind always feels disturbed, concerned, self-conscious, and has so many different ideas about what's good, what's bad. And it feels also resentful, envious, and there are many emotions in the mind and the body. So they are not so conducive for devotional service. But when we hear about Krishna sufficiently, then both of them become conducive, favorable. The body becomes enthusiastic to serve. And we have seen devotees who are so old or so, you could say from the material point of view, physically challenged. But they do more service than young and healthy people sometimes. And Prabhupada would joke with his disciples. He was old, of course, sometimes 3 times as old as some of his disciples, but they couldn't catch up with him. They couldn't keep up the pace with Srila Prabhupada's service. Even his physical activity, when he would walk in the morning walk, they couldn't keep up with him. Even though they were taller than him and stronger than him, Prabhupada would walk faster. And Prabhupada would joke with them. He said, well, maybe you're too young to work hard for Krishna. That was his joke. Maybe you're too young. When you get old, then you can start working. But it's best not to wait. Right? So, and then the mind becomes full of plans for serving Krishna, full of taste. We feel attracted to devotees, we feel attracted to Krishna, feel attracted to the temple. We don't have to force ourselves anymore, but we shouldn't take it for granted. If you don't give enough nourishment to the mind and the body by hearing Krishna Katha and associating with devotees, they will again lapse into their natural states, mode of passion and mode of ignorance. And Prabhupada explained in his purport, he explains in this purport, to this verse he says, very short purport, even shorter than this one, but extremely important. Prabhupada says, all the devotees connected with the Krishna consciousness movement must read all the books that have been translated, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and others. Otherwise, after some time, they will simply eat, sleep, and fall down from their position. Eat and sleep and fall down. That's because when you sleep, then you roll over and you fall down from that position on the floor. Thus, they will miss the opportunity to attain an eternal blissful life of transcendental pleasure. Srila Prabhupada was extremely emphatic about the importance of his books, not because he wrote them, but because he didn't. He thought, I didn't write those books, Krishna wrote them, and he manifested himself in these books. When you hear about, read these books, he said, even interestingly, he said, because reading books is not something traditionally done in Vedic culture. You hear You don't read, you hear from the spiritual master. It was only for the people of Kali Yuga that Vyasadeva wrote down. He devised that means of writing. Even though we did see in Bhagavatam Rukmini and Krishna exchanging missives and letters and things. But it was not something it was a gadget. Like nowadays, usually we don't get a book for Srimad Bhagavatam, it's the phone. Right? So it was like a technological invention to send messages. Otherwise, they would just be hearing from the spiritual master. But Prabhupada was insisting on reading his books because he said, I didn't write these books. Krishna wrote them. He manifested in the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam. And anyone who reads them regularly, like Sarupa Damodar Prabhu, is it okay if I reveal that? I think it was a public statement by you, so it's not confidential. He said that in his preaching, he tries to reintroduce that culture of charity. If you receive something from someone, it's best to give something in charity, even though he or she don't expect you to give anything. For them, the ability, the opportunity to speak about the instruction of the spiritual master of Krishna is enough charity. That's enough. But it's always good to give something in return. And Sarupa Damodar said, I really like that. He said, he asks the devotees to express their gratitude and the charity by reading Prabhupada's books regularly. If you feel grateful to someone who inspired you in devotional service, the best way you can reciprocate with that effort is to read books every day. A little bit, he said, just a little, like 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but every day. And that's what will provide our soul and the mind and the body with spiritual nourishment. What we also do, and I'll conclude with that, even though there are many points that need to be made, especially if you remember that in Chaitanya Charitamrita there's a chapter in Antilila which is titled Lord Chaitanya tastes the nectar of Krishna's lips. Right? And that chapter interestingly describes two things in which nectar of Krishna's lips is deposited. Can you remember where? Two things. One is prasadam, yes, and then Lord Chaitanya praised prasadam, Lord Jagannath saying, this prasadam is so transcendental, Krishna's lips must have touched it. And the second one is Krishna's flute. But that Krishna's flute is imbued with the presence of Krishna's adharamrita. How does it the gopis go in their Gopi Gita? Surata Vardhanam, Shokanashanam, Svarita Venuna, Sushtu Chumbitam, Itararaga Vismaranam Nrinam, Vitara Viranaste Daramritam. That's one of the verses that they speak in the Gopi Gita. And they say that the sound of Krishna's flute is Surata Vardhanam. It expands or deepens the feelings of conjugal love, or whatever other type of love devotees in Vrindavan have, whatever original position they have, that becomes deepened by hearing Krishna's flute. And then Shokanashanam, the sound of Krishna's flute destroys shoka, means miseries of this world. Svarita Venuna Sushtu Chumbitam, because the flute of Krishna is being kissed by Krishna's. And the gopis pronounce this line with a little bit of resentfulness and jealousy. How did he get there? And they purposely use the pronoun he. How did he, Venu, get there at the lips of that original male Krishna? That's strange. They use these incisive, sharp words to get under the flute's skin, you could say. What is it? And Krishna also. What is it? It's our property. How did that flute use the male gender, the noun and male male gender? How does it end up there by Krishna's lotus lips? And then they say, Sushchitumbitam, Itara Vraga Vismaranam Nrinam, just by hearing the sound of Krishna's flute, we are forced to forget Itara Raga Vismaranam, the mundane, worldly rasas. Vitara Vira Naste Dharamritam. This is the nectar of lotus lips of Krishna that we, the gopis, beg. But that nectar and the mercy, the saffron particles, they become deposited in the sound of Krishna's flute. And that the sound of Krishna's flute, where do we find it? Take your guess, dear devotees. In Srila Prabhupada's books and also in the Kirtana, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And just by hearing Prabhupada's words in his lectures, by reading his books, and Prabhupada once said that if you read my books silently, that's smaranam, but if you read my books out loud, that's kirtanam and shravanam, rolled in one, like that. So this is the perfect combination. Then by gradually hearing from his lips, gradually the original nature of our eternal relationship with Krishna becomes revealed. And this is how Gopakumar in Brihad Bhagavatamrita describes the effect of Krishna's flute, the sound of Krishna's flute. When Krishna was at a distance, far away, then the sound of Krishna's flute was kind of indistinctive. You couldn't hear the separate notes and the melody, but you could hear the vibrations. It was very attractive. And then the cows, with their ears, speaking about ears, they would all point their ears to the place from which Krishna's flute was emanating. But then when Krishna drew closer, Gopakumar said, I could now distinguish, I could hear the different melodies that Krishna was playing on his flute. But then he drew up close, was very close, then I could hear different, decorations, musical embellishments that Krishna used, very, very fine. Krishna is very sophisticated and delicate, and he's very refined in his, whatever he does, all arts. And I could hear everything, very small, minute details of Krishna's playing the flute. Like a little trembling, a little vibration, a little this, a little that. I don't know the terms, but I'm sure flutists have this kind of parlance. So this is a very, very apt description of what happens in our spiritual life. At first, when we just hear the generic, and get the generic inspiration. But if we don't betray that inspiration, by maintaining it every single day, by getting in touch with Krishna, by continuing to look at the place from which Krishna is supposed to appear. Just like Gopakumar, when he came to Vrindavan, Krishna was away. But the gopis told him, stay here, stand right here, and look there. And don't move. That's where Krishna is going to come from. See this road? That's where he's going to come from. Just keep looking. And that's what the spiritual masters tell us. Keep looking, keep coming to Mangalarati, keep chanting your rounds, keep taking prasadam, keep offering prasadam, offering bhoga to Krishna. Don't eat bhoga. Keep associating with devotees, keep serving, keep doing something. Keep looking at Krishna by reading Prabhupada's books. Look at the place from which Krishna is supposed to appear. He'll come. He'll first appear as in a cloud of dust, and then he will come closer and closer and closer. And eventually what happens, Krishna sees us and he recognizes us. Oh, look at that, Sarupa, my dear friend. I've been waiting for him for so long. And Krishna starts racing towards Sarupa and jumps actually. Now he couldn't even run fast enough. Out of his anticipation, eagerness to meet Sarupa, he jumps. Just like those sprinters, they run and they jump through the finish line. And he jumps, he lunges at Sarupa and embraces him like that. So this is what is created by us following the simple but potent and completely spiritual process of hearing from Srila Prabhupada. His books, his lectures, kirtans, and the lips of his followers. And I have to finish here, I'm sorry, I have gone over time. But I thought it was very interesting how this hearing combines all the senses that previously described in Sarupa Damodar Prabhu and Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj and other senses. So this is a few words about today's verse. We don't have time for questions. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaura Premanande.